Oh, how I love Generation 3. These games are easily the ones I've spent the most time playing. There's so many amazing changes that Ruby and Sapphire brought to the table. Abilities, natures, double battles, contests, a rework of IVs and EVs, an overhaul of the berry system, an update to Pokemon storage. Okay, that last one may not sound important, but trust me, it is. But of course, the best thing this generation gave us was new Pokemon. And Game Freak really delivered this time around. Outside of maybe only Generation 1, Gen 3 is home to some of the most iconic and loved Pokemon throughout the entire roster. But amidst these amazing Pokemon, there's some really disappointing additions as well. Today, we'll take a look at some of those additions and tell you why they're a waste of your time. These are the worst Gen 3 Pokemon. Some really quick housekeeping before we get started. My definition of worst is based on a more comprehensive list of factors like the ones on screen. Pokemon can be bad for a lot of reasons, and I wanted to shed light on those reasons as opposed to yelling at Azurill and Wurmple for having a base stat total of under 200. Next, I won't be considering any version exclusives between Ruby and Sapphire. Thankfully for Gen 3 that doesn't really matter, since the version exclusives are all pretty decent. Even Mawile and Sableye are good enough to stay off the list, which says a lot about what's coming up. And for those wondering why Emerald isn't being considered, I like critiquing these Pokemon based on their debut in the franchise, and these third versions typically have a lot of revisions to moves or encounter rates. And the last thing, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. My dog and I would both appreciate it. Okay, let's jump in. Like with Gen 2, the updates and expansions made to the game allow every Pokemon a little more flexibility in what they can do, and even carve out specific niches for some. However, it's ironic when Pokemon centered around a new mechanic are mediocre at that mechanic. And that brings me to Gen 3's Pikachu clones, Plusle and Minun. Off the bat, stats are okay. There's nothing remarkable, but they aren't the worst I've seen. The special stats and speed are passable, I guess. And I'll be honest with you, these are some of the better looking stats on the list. Seeing what they learn through level up, it's just electric and normal moves, with a few helpful status moves like Thunder Wave, Encore, and on Plusle only, Fake Tears. Oh, and as for moves via TM, the only other coverage you get is Iron Tail, which is locked behind the 8th gym badge, so that's just great. Now the most positive thing I have to say about Plusle and Minun is that they're available quite early, on Route 110, just north of Slateport. Technically you can get them with only one gym badge since you can skip Brawly temporarily. There is a downside to being available this early though. Being caught between levels 12 and 13, you have several levels to go where your only attack is Quick Attack, which is less than helpful with these guys' pitiful attack stats. On the bright side, they aren't too hard to find. Well, I should say one of them isn't too hard to find. In Ruby, Minun has a 15% encounter rate while Plusle only has a 2% rate. In Sapphire, they flip. 2% is definitely annoying, but there's a 1% on this list that drove me slightly crazy, so it's not the absolute worst. My biggest critique of these two has to do with their gimmick of double battles. Plusle and Minun have the abilities plus and minus. When in a double battle, they boost each other's special attacks by 50%. That's pretty good. So what's the catch? Well, you're never gonna make use of it. For starters, taking advantage of these abilities automatically uses up a third of your party. And unless you're planning a monotype electric run, this lack of team diversity will get annoying fast. But even if you're willing to sacrifice the space on your team, you're very rarely going to be in double battles anyways. If you've mostly played Emerald, you might be a bit confused. There's a ton of double battles along routes, with the 7th gym being full of them. Well, in Ruby and Sapphire, a majority of those double battles aren't present, and Tate and Liza's gym only has one double battle, being Tate and Liza. I'm glad they added a ton of double battles in Emerald, but it doesn't change the fact that the mechanic is barely present in its debut. So all in all, Plusle and Minun don't get a chance to shine in the way they were meant to. That being said, individually they aren't that bad. Hoenn has a lot of water, and these two can make their way through most of the water routes with ease. Of the two, I would recommend Plusle as it's the more offensive option. You're not really going to be noticing that defense on Minun. Or even better yet, just don't use them. The much better option here would be Manectric. It's better in basically every single way, and you can catch Electric on the same route as Plusle and Minun. It even has the highest encounter rate on that route, so you're likely to run into it first. Plusle and Minun are basically just gimmicks that didn't even get the chance to gimmick at their debut. Poor little guys. So, now that we're done with the doubles team, our next entries on the list are also a dynamic duo. Or I guess more of a disappointing duo. Here we have Volbeat and Illumise. Or Illumise. I don't really care. Two of the more forgettable Gen 3 Pokemon, these two just have nothing going for them. Let's start off with our most glaring issue, stats. Like Plusle and Minun, they basically have the same spread, with the only difference being a swap in attack and special attack. And again, just like with our two electric rodents, we have a somewhat good speed stat, with everything else being abysmal. A base stat of 73 in attack and special attack is pretty sad. When you realize that Pokemon like Bellsprout and Oddish hit harder, how bad these two Pokemon are really starts to sink in. And it's not like they have any level up moves to help them out either. Volbeat is in a slightly better position here as it gets Signal Beam, as well as a slew of utility moves like Double Team, Confuse Ray, and Moonlight. Although relying on these moves will require you to sit through some pretty lengthy battles. Illumise is in an even worse position for moves, since it only gets normal attacks through level up, with overall worse utility moves, at least for single player. Not to mention, the strongest attacking move it gets through level up is Quick Attack. And while these two get a surprising amount of coverage through TMs, don't forget that we're still a few generations away from TMs being reusable. So while you could teach them moves like Brick Break, Thunderbolt, and Shadow Ball, you're much better off saving those moves for Pokemon that really need them. One positive I can say about these two is that they're available pretty early, being caught just west of Mauville City. However, we have another Plusle and Minun situation here, but worse. Illumise is available in Ruby with an 18% encounter rate, and the same goes for Volbeat and Sapphire. The other bug for each game is found at a 1% encounter rate. Remember how I mentioned that a 1% encounter rate drove me crazy? Yeah, that was Volbeat. What's especially infuriating is that there's another 1% encounter rate on the route being Surskit that I found several times before I encountered Volbeat. Between Yanma last gen and Volbeat now, these 1% encounter rate bug Pokemon are really starting to wear on my sanity. There's more I can say about these two, but none of it really makes much of a difference. As bug types, they're at a disadvantage against several gym leaders. Team Aqua and especially Team Magma aren't great matchups either. Oh, and Volbeat has the chance to have Illuminate as an ability, which increases the likelihood of getting encounters, which is one of the most annoying abilities to deal with in a casual playthrough. Funny enough, these two actually make Plusle and Minun look good, which is something I didn't think I'd be saying today. In terms of bug types, I'd rather take Beautifly or Dustox if I'm being honest. And when you get outclassed by the early game bug types, you definitely deserve to be on the list of worst Pokemon. Okay, moving along, let's look at the rock type. Gen 3 gave us some pretty respectable ones. Even though they aren't the cream of the crop of the type, they're all decent enough in their own ways. That is, except for Nosepass. Just like in Gen 1, the ace of the rock type gym leader is a real disappointment. Nosepass is really lopsided. It has really good physical and special defense, but with such a low HP stat of 30, that doesn't really amount to much. To put this into perspective, since it can be hard to visualize, if Nosepass had base 80 HP, its defense would also be 80 and its special defense would be 55. So the reality is that its defenses are average at best. And with 45 in both attacking stats and an awful 30 in speed, Nosepass just sucks in stats. Based on that alone, it's not worth your time, but there's still more that contributes to Nosepass's suckiness. Here's a pop quiz for you. Where do you find Nosepass in Ruby and Sapphire? I wouldn't be surprised if a majority of you didn't know the answer, and that's because you've probably never run into a wild Nosepass. The only way to encounter one is in Granite Cave, through the use of Rock Smash. In Generation 3, every time you smash a rock, you have either a 1 in 9 or a 5 in 36 chance to encounter a Pokemon. Side note, I don't know why they chose these random fractions, but they really piss me off. If you haven't realized by now, that means this Pokemon is really far out of your way to get. You don't have the ability to use Rock Smash until you beat the 3rd gym, by which point Dewford and Granite Cave are long behind you. Be honest, did you ever go back to Granite Cave after delivering the letter to Steven? I definitely didn't. And even if you did go back to find one, it might take you a while. If you end up getting an encounter from breaking a rock, Nosepass only has a 30% chance to appear, whereas 70% of the time, you'd encounter a Geodude. I don't know which of the two fractions is applicable in Granite Cave, but either way, every time you use Rock Smash, you only have about a 3 to 4% chance of encountering a Nosepass. And since there's only a few breakable rocks in Granite Cave, odds are you'll be resetting over and over to find one. That's what I had to do. So not only is Nosepass abysmal in terms of stats, it's a slight pain in the ass to catch as well. And I haven't even talked about its moves. Not that there's much to say, because with pitiful attacking stats, even good moves like Rock Slide won't do a ton of damage. I guess it's cool that Nosepass got the lock-on Zap Cannon combo, but it's not really helpful. And with Hoenn being full of water Pokemon, Nosepass just doesn't stand a chance. I get that like with Onix, you don't want the first gym leader's ace to be too strong, but you didn't need to cripple it this much. As much as its design haunts my dreams, Probopass was a necessary addition, and even then it's still not anything special. Now let's talk normal types. I'm sure off the bat you may have an idea for this one. Cast form, right? Everybody gets one at the Weather Institute and then we just chuck it straight in the box. Funny enough though, there's a normal type worse than cast form in my opinion, and that's Spinda. Cast form has base 70 stats across the board, which isn't good, don't get me wrong. But like the drunk that Spinda is, it goes, hold my beer, and shows off its base 60 stats across the board. Every Pokemon on the list so far has had a higher total than Spinda. And to be honest, stats alone gets it on this list. It's available early to mid-game, shortly after the 3rd gym badge, and has a 70% encounter rate on the route you find it. Plus, it gets some decent moves. Feint Attack and Psybeam early on are nice for coverage, and with Dizzy Punch and Teeter Dance, both moves are great for confusing the opponent. So Spinda isn't really hurting much in the move department. Especially because, like most normal types, it gets some really good coverage moves through TM. But again, like with Volbeat and Illumise, it isn't worth your time to waste good TMs on a bad Pokemon. Spinda is okay at the point in the game you catch it, but it very quickly gets left behind as soon as you start facing opponents with evolved Pokemon. Even by the time you reach the normal gym, it's pretty much outlived its usefulness. If you want a normal type that does similar things, you might as well just wait for Kecleon. Better stats outside of speed, the same if not better coverage, it's just a better choice. And I don't even think Kecleon is that good to be honest. It just goes to show that even if a Pokemon has other things going for it, stats really matter a lot at the end of the day. Sorry Spinda, maybe one day you'll get an evolution where they add an extra torso to you and call you Spindinda. Stupid ass Dunsparce. Alright, anybody that knows anything about Gen 3 could have predicted this next entry on the list. Feebas. Now let me get this out of the way. No, I am not saying Milotic is a bad Pokemon. If anything, it's one of the best water types in the game. But that doesn't change the fact that Feebas is obnoxious. If you're one of the 7 people that don't know by this point, Feebas is available by fishing on Route 119, on only 6 random tiles out of 400. I don't need to do the math to explain why that's annoying. Yes, you could get lucky, but odds are you'll be fishing for a while. And what's funny is that Feebas only has a 50% encounter rate of appearing on any of those 6 tiles, so you're going to want to fish at least a few times on every one to make sure you don't accidentally miss it. Okay, now you might be saying,
Shepsky, that alone doesn't make Feebas that terrible. It's like basically a 1% encounter rate, but once you find it, you're in the clear.
And well, you're kind of right. While Feebas' encounter rate is easily its worst trait, there's one more thing that lands it on this list, and that's its evolution method. While in future games you can evolve Feebas while trading it holding a Prism Scale, the only way to evolve it in Gen 3 is through maxing out its beauty stat by feeding it Pokeblocks. I won't go too in depth on the berry system in this game, as riveting as it is, but this can be a tedious process. All it boils down to is using the correct berries to make either blue or indigo Pokeblocks, and force feeding your fish until it's ready to sprout into an elegant sea serpent. This is possible before beating the game, even if you don't replant berries every time you pick them. However, that doesn't change the tediousness of the process, especially because focusing your time on evolving Feebas essentially halts all progress for you otherwise. But if you jump through all the hoops required, Feebas evolves into a fantastic Pokemon. So is it really one of the worst? Hard to say. I think the final factor that really swayed my decision is that Milotic isn't a Pokemon you can naturally get without all this knowledge. Even if you're lucky enough to find a Feebas, there's no way you'd ever know to maximize its beauty stat to evolve it. I'm curious, did any of you ever find yourself in a position like this when playing these games years ago? I picture someone having a level 50 Feebas, screaming about why it isn't evolving yet, figuring it would have just had the Gyarados treatment. Let me know in the comments if you've dealt with this in the past. I'm very interested in your Feebas horror stories. Next up, we have one of the most forgettable Gen 3 Pokemon for many people, Chimecho. Easily one of the best Pokemon on this list, Chimecho suffers mostly in the availability department. It's only available on the summit of Mount Pyre. While this is a required section of the game for the story, the grass in which you encounter Chimecho is entirely skippable, meaning a lot of people probably ignored it anyways, as did I. But on top of that tiny habitat, Chimecho is only found at a 2% encounter rate. And while yes, it is better than our 1%, it can still keep you searching for a while. But if you succeed in finding it, what you're left with is something really mediocre.
Mediocre?
Looking at its stats, while not terrible, they aren't that great either. The best looking thing here is 95 special attack, but when you take a closer look, it's not nearly as good as it seems. The only thing coming off that special attack are psychic moves and shockwave through TM. Fingers crossed you haven't used that yet. And while these moves do well against the water types in the late game and the Golbats and Crobats from the evil teams, that's where the positives end. The 7th gym is psychic type, so not much for Chimecho to do there, and the 8th gym is water type, which is good if you have shockwave, but it's far from the best strategy. And against the evil teams you'll be facing some Mightyena, not to mention Sharpedo from Team Aqua. Then you're weak to the first 2 Elite Four members, and then hit a wall on Steven. So why bother with Chimecho? Psychic types aren't that great in Gen 3 anyways, but if you wanted one, there are plenty of options available earlier in the game that have more going for them than Chimecho does. Gardevoir is an obvious choice, being stronger and faster, with about the same physical defense and better special defense. Plus it learns Thunderbolt over Shockwave. But you can even make the argument that Grumpig is a better psychic type too. Yet again, faster and bulkier than Chimecho, with only 5 less special attack. And hey, it also gets Shockwave. All in all, Chimecho isn't set up for success and isn't worth going after. I wouldn't be surprised if it was one of the least used Gen 3 Pokemon. I almost forgot this last Pokemon entirely. I don't usually call out any one Pokemon as the absolute worst of the generation in these videos, but if I was going to, this one would definitely be my top pick. May I present to you, Luvdisc. That's it. That's the rest of the video. In all seriousness, Luvdisc is just there. The only positive thing I can say about it is that it's the fastest water type introduced in Gen 3. Everything else about it sucks. Look at those stats. Just look at those stats. Mudkip is stronger, for Christ's sake. No notable moves anywhere. It's only available through fishing on Route 128 in Evergrande City, near the very end of the game, which means you need a water type to reach it anyways. Do you want to know what Luvdisc's only contribution to society is? Heart Scales. Introduced in Gen 3, you can give Heart Scales to the move reminder to let your Pokemon relearn a move. While there are several Heart Scales throughout the game, the only renewable source is through Luvdisc. Each wild Luvdisc has a 50-50 chance of holding a Heart Scale. So, in a weird twist of fate, the worst Pokemon actually has an important use. It's just too bad that that use has nothing to do with the main point of the game, battling. Gen 3 will always be one of my favorites, and has some of the best new Pokemon we've ever received. But amongst all the good are plenty of Pokemon that try to slip through the cracks. Do you feel like I missed any? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Just like last time, I want to take a quick look at Generation 2 and talk about a couple Pokemon y'all brought up in the comments. So when talking about bad Gen 2 Pokemon, the topic of swarms often come up. Mass outbreaks, or swarms, were introduced in Generation 2 alongside the Pokegear feature. If you registered specific trainers in your Pokegear, you had a chance for them to call you and inform you about a large number of Pokemon in a certain area. The Pokemon this applied to all have 1% encounter rates outside of this occurrence, one of which made it onto my list, Yanma. Having a 1% encounter rate never helps a Pokemon's case, and while none of the ones on this list are amazing, I think Yanma is definitely the worst of them. Although I do want to bring attention to Qwilfish and Remoraid. As this chart shows, if one of these Pokemon is swarming, you can catch it with any kind of rod. However, if you wanted to catch one of these two outside of a swarm, you would actually be unable to until beating the main game. Both Remoraid and Qwilfish can only be fished up with a Super Rod normally, which you receive on Route 12 in Kanto. So while technically available before beating the Elite Four, you might be wasting time waiting on a phone call if you really wanted one that early. That all being said, I don't dislike this swarm mechanic. As several people were commenting, Generation 2 came at a time where Game Freak was still figuring out where to take the franchise, and making the decision to make some Pokemon incredibly rare isn't a bad thing. If anything, it helped keep people playing. With a tagline of, "Gotta catch 'em all," it makes total sense. Speaking of things locked behind the main game though, last time I brought up Murkrow, Misdreavus, Houndour, and Slugma for all being available in Kanto. Well, turns out there's one more in this situation that I forgot, and it's probably the worst of them all, Sneasel. It's only available at Mount Silver, meaning it's locked behind 16 badges, not just 8. but the disappointing thing for Sneasel is that its type really hinders it. Dark and Ice are both special in Generation 2, and Sneasel's special is awful. It can still do well with physical attacks and fantastic speed, but as a Dark Ice type, it sucks. Not like you used it, because again, locked behind 16 badges. Alrighty, that's all from me for now. Thanks again for watching, and be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you know when I upload. The Gen 4 video will be a very interesting one given all the changes that came with the new games. That'll be coming in a little while. But for now, as thanks for making it to the end of the video, here's a picture of my dog. Talk to y'all soon.